So it's day 15, and the prompt today was a lace covered journal, or lace journal cover, which is what I'm going to attempt to make. So I'm just playing around with some different bits and pieces. I want to use a piece of shibori dyed fabric that I learnt to dye in a class, and then I'm looking at what elements I'm going to add on top. So I'm playing around with some other shibori fabrics and some beautiful indigo Japanese thread, and now I've got a bunch of vintage laces as well. I'm not going to put lace all over it because for me that's a bit too frou-frou. I love lace, love lace, especially vintage lace, but I don't like it all over the place. I don't want it everywhere. I'll put quite a bit on, but just not everywhere. So what I've got is I've got my fabric, and then in between I've put some felt, just some cream felt, and then underneath it's just some plain sort of like a cream homespun, or calico in Australia as we'd call it. So I love this fabric. This is an old piece of fabric, and I'm going to fussy cut out those flowers there because I want to put them on the cover. And then I'm going to play around with some elements. It takes me a while to work out what will look good because I kept laying things down and it just wasn't working for me. So I know I want to use these flowers and this bird doily because I love the bird doily. And I'm going to do it the way Rachel did, which is what I was already thinking when I got this prompt before, that I want to do a fabric soft cover journal with the doily that's going to fold over the front. So it's similar kind of way that Rach did hers. It's funny how sometimes we think alike. I really love that trim, but it's kind of the darker, sort of the browny colour is a little bit dark and it doesn't end up working for me. And I'm also playing around with some bits and pieces of shibori fabric, and then I'll play around with the lace as well and just work out what looks good. So I'm going to do this in a similar style to the way I did my Christmas tablecloth, if anyone has seen that. I know several people have, where I'll stitch down by machine layer by layer. So pretty much, even though I'm pinning on the flowers, I actually start with stitching down the laces first, and then I'll add some fabrics and the embroidery and then the flowers, etc. on top. So I do in fact play around with this for ages. I've cut a lot of it out because it's pretty boring watching me put things on and take them off over and over again. But essentially this is where I've stitched on the base layer, which is all the lace, and then I stitch on the flowers and the bit of the vine and the extra sort of doilies and things on top. Now what I'm going to do, I want to do some embellishing with some hand embroidery. So I've picked some different colours of threads that I think will go well with this piece. I've also got that beautiful hand-dyed crochet doily there from a friend of mine called Deb from Raspberry Treats, and also I'm going to put on a little Suffolk puff, or also known as a yo-yo, which is a vintage one that I also get from a lovely supplier called Mel. So I've just sped this up so that you don't have to watch me hand stitch that doily on, because it takes quite a while. Just finishing it off on the back, and now I'll stitch on the Suffolk puff. So they are both nice and secure now, stitched on. And now I'm ready to do some embroidery. So I've picked a bunch of threads. I have a mix of stranded cottons, so like a DCM stranded cotton. And I also have some perlé threads. Some of them are hand dyed, so they're slightly variegated. This navy blue one that I'm using right now is a navy blue Japanese shishiko thread, and I'm just doing a simple running stitch, also known as cantha stitching or boro stitching. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can call it, but pretty much the stitch is just a running stitch, the most basic stitch you can do. So next I go for this bright pink thread, which is a perlé cotton thread, which is hand dyed. It's slightly variegated. You might not be able to notice, but it does slightly change in its tones of pink. And I'm just going to do some French knots. One in them around, I think I did 4 times. Let's have a look. So let's have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, 4 times around, and I just do a few French knots along the side of that vine. Now I'm using the exact same thread and doing more French knots just down the bottom to give it a little accent. So now I decide just to do some crosses, and I'm using a stranded thread in kind of like a sage green, and I'm using all 6 strands because I want the crosses to be thick. So I've got quite a few crosses there, but I do come back and add some more later because I just feel like it needed more. Now I'm doing, this is seed stitch, so I'm just doing little tiny stitches that run all different directions This is with the bright pink perle cotton, so it's a single strand of perle cotton, about a number 8 perle. Now back to the navy blue thread again, and I'm just doing single running stitches, but instead of in a line, you'll see they end up going side by side, so kind of like a ladder. Okay, so they're all done and they run all the way down that little side there, and now I'm thinking about what to do next. So this time I have a different pink perle thread, and I decide to do some French knots just in that little pansy. So I'm done for the moment. Just to show you up close some of the stitching that I've done. I've done some crosses, some X's, seed stitches, running stitch and French knots. So I did a bit more stitching off camera. You can see I've gone around the Suffolk path. I've added some more French knots and crosses, a bit more running stitch, and I've also stitched the word bloom and sewn a few flowers. So on the back I've put another piece of my shibori dyed fabric, and I'm going to simply stitch around it with the sewing machine. So I've also added a piece of silk, shibori dyed silk, as the little wraparound and tuck in to hold it all together. And now I've finished all the stitching, so I'm going to show you what it looks like. So I used a combination of zigzag and straight stitching. I've stitched down the middle just to create a couple of seams where the journal will fold. And that's pretty much what it looks like now. Obviously the inside would need to be made. So this is just the soft cover, and eventually you know, I might want to add in some pockets as well. But it's really lovely to touch because of the felt. It feels like it's a little mini quilt, a bit like Rachel's, but she used quilter's wadding. Mine's probably just slightly thinner because I used felt. Well, I hope you like what I've done, and I'll see you tomorrow.